Hey everyone, I'm Sinai, your 4-star guy. Xiangling is a 4-star character that at this point I am fairly certain is one of the best 4-stars in the game. Between her great potential physical damage using the Crescent Pike with the many hits of her normal attack, as well as her great pyro damage over time with her skill and ultimate, lets her be a great main damage dealer. But since her ultimate and skill can still deal damage over time while another character is on the field, she can be a great support for characters who can use pyro applications for their reactions. In my opinion, Xiangling is the only pyro character capable of supporting other characters well in this way, since all of the other pyro characters kinda need to be on the field for them to do pyro damage. I guess that Xinyan is an exception, but she's pretty inconvenient compared to Xiangling. Along with her pyro damage over time, Goba gives us a 12% attack boost when its duration ends, and her first constellation decreases the enemy's pyro resistance by 15% when hit by Goba. These factors give her that little extra reason to use her as a support, but they can also help her as a main damage dealer. Constellation 1 seems pretty reasonable to get since we already get one copy of her for free. In this video, I will give you guys 5 team ideas that I think are good with Xiangling, and hopefully this will help you find a team you like. Let's start by taking a look at some of the resonances and reactions that are useful to Xiangling to see what other characters she would work well with. Pyro Resonance is the most obvious choice for me since she can contribute to it herself and it is one of the most convenient damage boosts from the resonances. Geo Resonance is another pretty good choice to increase our damage, but it is a little more situational and I'll talk more about the implications of using it when I talk about a team based on it. Electro Resonance is pretty useful too, allowing us to generate some energy when we do reactions like Overloaded or Superconduct, but since we can only generate at most 1 electro particle every 5 seconds, it gives us less energy than I would like it. I wouldn't really consider the other 3 resonances. The Anemo resonance seems pretty good honestly, but I think that forcing 2 Anemo characters on your team would really limit the reactions you can do. Cryo Resonance is cool for extra crit rate, but it only works when the enemy is affected by cryo, and keeping the enemy constantly affected by cryo would be hard with Xiangling, unless you just don't use her skills or ultimate, which I think is a huge waste. And we have better options than Hydro Resonance. As for reactions, we can get a lot of damage through the pyro reactions like Overloaded, Vaporize, and Melt. I'll talk more about how good each is when I get to it since the devil is in the details for those. But we can also use some reactions to support us, such as Superconduct, which can allow us to do way more physical damage with her normal attacks and the extra hits from the Crescent Pike. You may wonder if it is worthwhile to fit both an Electro and Cryo character on the team just to do Superconduct when Xiangling is a pyro character, but I think it totally is. And even though we don't get much out of Swirl or Crystallize themselves, we can get good damage support out of these reactions if the Anemo or Geo character uses certain artifact sets. More specifically, doing Swirl with the Veritas Inventor artifact set decreases the enemy's resistance to the element that was swirled by 40%, and doing Crystallize with the Archaic Petra set will increase our damage done by the crystallized element by 35%. Both of these artifact sets can help us do more pyro damage with Xiangling. Alright, so now I'm going to be talking about teams that I think Xiangling will be good in as a support. Because Xiangling has so many hits of pyro damage when she uses her ultimate and Goba, there is no crowd character that could set up Melt for her reliably, even if they tried, unless you just don't use her skill or ultimate. But at that point, what is the purpose of amplifying her damage by 2 times on half of her pyro damage? I think that it is an important detail to bring up that not every elemental hit of multi-hit moves actually have to apply their element. If you want to learn more about the intricate details of stuff like this involved in elemental reactions, you can check out a video I made explaining everything you need to know to set up elemental reactions reliably. Kai's ultimate may deal more hits of cryo damage faster than Xiangling does with pyro, but only about half of Kai's hits from his ultimate actually applies cryo. But at the timing that it happens, Xiangling's pyro would melt one application and apply pyro herself before Kai's next cryo application, meaning that the melt with Xiangling as a triggering character will not happen afterwards. The point is, Xiangling cannot use melt as a damage dealer herself, but she can potentially support a cryo character for reverse melt to happen, amplifying cryo damage by a smaller amount. This is more reliable for 2 reasons. 1, every hit from Xiangling's ultimate and Goba apply pyro, so she applies pyro very often. And 2, when doing reverse melt, the cryo does not completely cleanse the pyro aura, meaning that you can do 2 reverse melts with 1 pyro application. At the moment, I think that there is only one character worthwhile to use reverse melt like this. Ganyu can do massive damage with her charge shots and the bloom damage that comes afterward. Both the charge shot and bloom apply cryo, meaning that both can melt and be amplified. Boosting the damage of both hits of her charge shot will be huge. With Xiangling, you can also use another pyro character to complete the pyro resonance. Bennett is the character I have in mind the most since he can boost our attack using his ultimate, and no other pyro character will be particularly great at being a support. Klee could also work if you have her second constellation that decreases the enemy's defense by 23% when hitting them with her skill, but seriously, good luck trying to pull 3 copies of her. As for the last teammate, an Anemo character seems awesome. We can use them to decrease the enemy's crowd resistance using Swirl. Many of them can help us do some crowd control too, which is extra helpful for Ganyu since bow characters can get interrupted while charging their bow. If you don't think getting interrupted while charging is a big deal, let me say it like this. Instead of spending time to charge up a large hit of damage, you spend time and end up doing no damage instead. I think Venti is the best since he can do major crowd controlling. If you absorb Pyro into his ultimate, that's another way to reliably set up Ganyu for melt. I will say though, swirling crowd to decrease their resistance to it, then absorbing Pyro into your ultimate may take some careful tomfoolery, or may take more time to set up. Sucrose can do some of the crowd control and Pyro damage that Venti can do, but she can also increase our team's elemental mastery, making your melt damage with Ganyu even bigger. If you think that's good enough, maybe she's better than Venti. Jean and the Anemo Traveler, while often not usually top choices for the Anemo support role since their skills usually put enemies out of the smashing range, this is no problem for Ganyu. In fact, I think it's actually good that they push enemies away, since it'll be hard to get interrupted this way. Jean can heal you, but the Anemo Traveler can absorb Pyro to set up melts with their ultimate, or absorb crowd to decrease their cryo resistance further by 20% due to their 6th constellation that everyone gets. Xiangling can make for a mighty fine teammate as well, since he can increase our damage with the Archaic Petra set, and decrease the enemy's physical and elemental resistance to nearby enemies by 20% while his shield is up. Being close to enemies is usually a problem, but his shield is strong and his ultimate can petrify enemies, so he has ways of keeping us from getting hit. Ganyu is the only cryo character that I think can use reverse mode effectively, but I can imagine Rosaria, Chongyun, Kaya, and maybe even Diona being okay choices. It's just that they don't do as much cryo damage, and some of the attacks from their multi-hit moves don't actually apply cryo, meaning that not all of their cryo damage can actually be amplified by melt. Cryo Resonance is kind of a dud when trying to use reverse melt, since in order to get reverse melt, the enemy will have to be affected by Pyro, and Cryo Resonance only gives you a crit rate boost on cryo affected enemies. Both cannot happen at the same time. As for the rest of the teams, Xiangling can absolutely work as your main damage dealer, but there are also many characters she works well with that can also be the main damage dealer while she is a support. First, I want to talk about a team using Overloaded. I think that it is a reaction that can deal a lot of damage, but because it launches most enemies away from you, you are going to lose a lot of DPS spending time to chase enemies as they are launched away, or missing up follow-up hits when they get out of reach. Because of this, I don't think that this team is super viable, and I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about it, but I think that there are many possibilities for this kind of team. On the other hand, I do think it goes well against very large enemies, since they don't get flung away and they'll stay put to take all of the damage you dish out. There are a few ways I can imagine building the team. 2 Pyro characters and 2 Electro characters, or 2 Pyro characters, 1 Electro character and 1 Anemo character, or 1 Pyro character, 2 Electro characters and 1 Anemo character. Part of it depends on what elemental resonance you want, either Pyro to buff your attack or Electro to give you some energy. Keep in mind that increasing your attack does not increase the damage that Overloaded does, it only increases the damage that you do using your moves. I think that another important factor in deciding how to build your Overloaded team is figuring out which element needs to generate more energy to keep it going. In my opinion, using 2 Pyro characters, 1 Electro and 1 Anemo character is the best, since we can get an attack buff, decrease the enemy's Pyro resistance using Swirl since Overloaded deals Pyro damage, deal more Pyro damage from another character, and because Xiangling does kinda need a lot of energy to use her ultimate. But each configuration has their own pros and cons. For example, 2 Pyro and 2 Electro can let you do more Overloadeds and generate more energy for both elements, but I think that the Pyro resistance debuff an Anemo character can give you is better. In general, if her ultimate and skill are active, Xiangling will apply Pyro more than any Electro character can apply Electro, meaning that the Electro character will typically be triggering the reaction. If you are sure that the Electro character reliably triggers the reaction using your team, you can feel better about investing in Elemental Mastery on them to boost Overloaded's damage. Lisa, Beto, and Fischl can all trigger the reactions from off-field, meaning that they can be great supports for other characters in this team, but they can also do fine as the main damage dealer. Honestly, I don't know which is better than the other. Lisa applies Electro the most often during her ultimate, making her trigger Overloadeds the most, but enemies can easily be flung out of her ultimate's AoE. Beto doesn't trigger Overloadeds as much, but since her ultimate stays around our characters, we can chase down enemies as they fly away. Both of them have high energy costs for their ultimate, but Fischl can just rely on her skill along with her ultimate to keep up the Electro procs. You can also use Keqing and Razor as your Electro character, but they will have to be your main damage dealer since they are strong and they only apply Electro when they are active. Bennett can be a great Pyro support to buff our attack and generate Pyro energy, and Xinyan can be the main damage dealer or be a physical damage support and apply some Pyro herself using her shield's damage over time. Diluc, Hu Tao, and Klee can be main damage dealers but not supports, much like how Keqing and Razor were. Klee isn't as great of a support at C2 since decreasing the enemy's defense does not increase the amount of damage that Overloaded does, decreasing the resistance will though, which is why we would want an Anemo support. I think that Venti and Sucrose in particular will be the best options by far, since one of the worst things about this comp is how Overloaded flings enemies away, but their ultimates can keep them in place. Venti is better at crowd control, but Sucrose can increase the team's elemental mastery to boost our Overloaded damage. Xiangling can help decrease the enemy's resistance with his shield, keep them in place for a little while with his ultimate, and buff our pyro damage with the Archaic Petra set. But just remember that buffing our pyro damage does not increase the damage from overloaded, only the pyro damage from our attacks. A team that is very similar to the Overloaded team but I think is much better is a Superconduct team. This is because we can enable Xiangling to handle smaller mobs very easily by boosting her physical damage. A good chunk of the larger mobs have higher physical resistance, but that makes them perfect targets for Overloaded, especially since we need an electric character already for Superconduct. The main difference between this team and the last team is simply switching out the extra Electro or Anemo character with a Cryo one. For the Cryo character, in my opinion, you don't need a character who can apply a lot of Cryo, since Superconduct's physical resistance debuff lasts for 12 seconds anyway. Because of this, I think that Dion and Chi-Chi are fine choices, especially if you don't have a healer for the rest of your team. Rosaria and Kaya are also great choices for a Cryo character for Superconduct. You really don't need anything fancy for it. Just make sure to not use Changyan, since your normal attacks will become Cryo, and all of the focus we put into her physical damage will be worthless. As for the third teammate, a Pyro character can complete Power Resonance and give us an attack boost. Bennett can increase our attack with his ultimate and generate energy for us. Xinyan can buff our physical damage while her shield is up. Klee can decrease the enemy's defense at C2, and although not a Pyro character, you can also use Xiangling to decrease the enemy's Pyro and physical resistance while his shield is up. As for Electro support options, they are the same as before, Lisa, Beidou, and Fischl. This time though, I do think that Lisa is the best. Spamming Overloaded can get in the way of your normal fighting, and using Beidou or Fischl will make you apply a lot of Electro and probably make a lot of accidental Overloadeds happen. With Lisa, you can just use one hit of her normal attack, then switch out. She can also hold the Thrilling Tales or Dragon Slayer's Catalyst, allowing her to pass on a big attack buff to Xiangling. Her ultimate also does the most damage when we try to spam Overloaded, letting us burst down big enemies the best. Not to mention her ultimate also decreases the enemy's defense by 15% when they're hit by it, because of one of her passives. I think that this Superconduct team is one of the two strongest team comps you can use Xiangling in, since it deals with mobs and the occasional mini-boss enemies very well. I wish I had more to say because I want to emphasize that I think this team is very good, but it is pretty straightforward compared to that Overloaded team. I think that Xiangling is one of the best non-Geo characters to work well in Geo Resonance teams. This is because she can keep on doing Pyro damage while a Geo main damage dealer is on the field, and she can help complete Pyro Resonance along with Geo Resonance to give us even more damage buffs. In my opinion, I think that when using Geo Resonance, it is best for the other two characters to be the same element, especially with Pyro since it has a strong elemental resonance. This is because if a Geo character is dealing Geo damage most of the time, it could ruin a lot of elemental reactions you would do with two characters of different elements, since it would clear their elemental auras when you do Crystallize. If a reaction does happen between those other two elements, again there would be no elemental aura for the Geo character to crystallize. Along with the fact that reactions would be a mess, having more shield shards is a nice bonus, and having two characters be the same element lets them generate more elemental energy for each other. In general, I think that you can put almost any two Geo and Pyro characters together and they will make a good team. Just make sure that you have a plan to use at least one strong damage dealer and to have the rest of the characters be able to support them. One Geo character can use the Archaic Petra set to increase the team's Pyro damage, and the other can hold whatever to make them do more damage themselves. I think that it will be slightly better to have a Geo main damage dealer, since Geo Resonance decreases the enemy's Geo resistance by 20%, but that doesn't mean that the Pyro damage dealers aren't good either. While her ultimate is active, Noelle can deal a good amount of damage with her normal attacks. She can also use her shield to let her handle whatever's thrown at her and heal while she's at it. Because she needs her ultimate to do good damage, I like to have a secondary DPS in case I need to buy time to charge it. Xiangling is good for this job. Ningguang can deal a lot of damage using her normal attacks, her charge attacks with those extra hits, her skill, and her ultimate. She is a good main DPS option and she can be the damage dealer full time since her whole kit is pretty strong. She can also be a solid support option since she can hold Thrilling Tales with Dragon Slayers. Albedo is a great support option, just dealing a bunch of Geo damage from off the field, generating Geo energy, and coming in to use his ult once in a while. Zhongli is a great support with his resistance debuff around his shield and strong ultimate. The Geo Traveler can deal a good amount of damage using their burst and skill. The skill generates a good amount of energy, and being in their ultimate gives us a 10% crit rate buff because of their first constellation. The cooldowns on their talents are not exactly short, and their normal attacks are pretty weak though. They are good to switch in to use their ultimate and skill as a support though. For the other power characters, Bennett can increase her attack using his ultimate and generate energy for Xiangling, Klee can drop the enemy's defense when using her skill at C2, and function as a main damage dealer. Xinyan can give us an emergency shield, deal some power damage over time with it, and deal damage using her ultimate. Huitao can be the main damage dealer. She could also use a secondary DPS during her skill's cooldown, and a shield for low HP situations, which this team can give her. And Diluc can also be a pyro damage dealer. Now for a team I have been having a blast with lately. I want to talk about a Vaporize team of Xiangling. As I said before, we can't use Xiangling as a melt damage dealer, and like how Pyro persists after reverse melt, Hydro persists after reverse Vaporize, meaning that even though Xiangling does a lot of Pyro damage over time, Hydro applications can still last for all of it, letting Xiangling trigger a bunch of Vaporizes. If you want Xiangling to be your main Vaporize damage dealer, Xingqiu will be the one character I can think of to make this possible. Barbara and Mona can somewhat do this, but Mona's skill is on cooldown a lot of the time, and Barbara's skill can get finicky to apply Hydro with, and I'm not sure if it can keep up with Xiangling's Pyro, and being a little too slow means that you mess up the reaction completely. If you are wondering if you should just use Xingqiu to do Vaporize himself, I guess you can, but out of each time that his swords attack the enemy, only one of them actually Vaporize, and there's 2 to 3 swords each time, so you're only amplifying about 2/5 of his ultimate's damage. Plus, I have a gut feeling that it is easier to invest in Xiangling's damage stats since she's the main damage dealer, and Xingqiu needs a good amount of energy recharge. Chad can actually be the main damage dealer instead of Xiangling though. He will be applying Hydro during his stance change, and to my knowledge and little testing I've done with him, he applies Hydro faster and Xiangling will still be doing the Vaporize. Also, when Chad's stance change is on cooldown, you could always switch to Xiangling to be the secondary damage dealer. Bennett will be a great choice as always with Xiangling, and I can imagine Xinyan working alright with her as well. Glee 2 yada yada C2. Having an Anemo or Geo character can help us do more Pyro damage, using the Veritas Inventor and Archaic Petra set. Sucrose is awesome since she can also increase our team's elemental mastery, making our Vaporize damage even better. Xiangling can decrease the enemy's physical and elemental resistance. If you want a healer, Jean can do that. Ningguang can hold the Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers, the Geo Traveler can increase their crit rate within their ultimate, and Venti has a crazy ultimate. You can use Kaya in this last slot too actually. With Xingqiu, Kaya can actually set up some melt for Xiangling, since Xingqiu is enough to cleanse Xiangling's Pyro applications, and Kaya's next Cryo application will be set afterward. And even if Kaya applies Cryo over Xingqiu's Hydro or vice versa, the enemy will be frozen, and melt can still happen. I don't think that this will be very viable though, since Kaya does not have a lot of uptime on his ultimate, and I think that decreasing the enemy's resistance with an Anemo character is more convenient and reliable. I think that because this team relies a lot on ultimates, it might not be so practical to use against normal mobs in small groups, like in the open world, since it might not be enough to recharge your ultimates all of the time, and the Superconduct and physical damage Xiangling can do is probably a little stronger against them anyway too. But like I said before, a lot of tankier mobs have more physical resistance than elemental, and I think that this team is really good against those mini-boss type enemies, especially since they will probably take enough hits from your skills to let you charge your ultimates back up. This is the other team that I think is in the top 2 strongest teams for Xiangling. So that was all of the team ideas I had for Xiangling. I think that she's one of the best 4-stars in the game and she can do so much so well. Keep in mind that whatever you end up doing with your teams is completely up to you. You may value something that I overlooked and may have thought of something that I didn't. This video was just to help you guys get ideas for what you can use her for and why I think it is strong for one reason or another, but you should have fun making your teams however you like. Anyway, thank you for watching the whole video if you did, and I hope it was worthwhile. Consider subscribing if you enjoyed what I had to say. I do Genshin Impact tips, team comps, character builds, and the occasional mess around video. Thank you for checking out my channel. See you next time.